Welcome to Better Relationships, Better Life, a podcast where you'll gain insights from relationship experts and entrepreneurial couples who have moved through conflict and into a better life, crack the clarity code, and create deeper connections beyond the messiness of relationships. Here's your host, Judy K. Herman.
Before we begin, if you're looking for a speaker for your next event, I would love to support you and your organization. Just go to judyspeaker.com. In today's episode, our guest is mediation professional Doug Noll as he addresses groundbreaking science to heal emotional abuse. Hang on with this lively conversation and challenges in previous ways we've been taught to handle conflict. From the courtroom to maximum security prisons, Doug brings healing and hope to couples with his breakthrough research and methodology. If you can, you'll want to take notes on this one. Let's listen in. This is Better Relationships, Better Life. My name is Judy Herman, and I am so glad you joined because I have a guest, special guest who is totally not in my field as a mental health counselor. So anyway, I wanted to introduce you to Doug Noll. He is a remarkable man and in a field legally, and you've written some books, Doug, and I'm just reading all of the things about your bio. You've gone through a lot of versions of yourself, haven't you, over the years?
I have. I kind of think that I like to think of it as growth. You stop growing, you start dying, right? So yes, I've reinvented myself many times.
Yeah, because you're no longer practicing as an attorney, correct?
Correct. I left the practice of law in 2000. We can talk about how that happened, but ultimately, I actually went back to school in my late 40s, entered my master's degree in peacemaking and conflict studies, and then left the practice of law in 2000 to become a peacemaker and mediator. And so I was a professional mediator. I still am a professional mediator, but then life has a funny way of opening up things for you. I discovered a really powerful technique that we'll talk about later about how to calm people down. And that ultimately led to a colleague of mine, Laurel Carfer, and I starting the Prison of Peace Project in 2010. And since then, we've been training lifers and long-termers in maximum security prisons around the world how to stop prison violence.
That is amazing. That is amazing. So you might be asking, if you're tuning in right now, Better Relationships, Better Life, why am I having a guest that has all of these credentials of going into the prisons, right? And really experiencing the darkness of humanity, right? And it's because in our marriages and in our relationships, we have this, we have elements of it, we have versions of it, don't we, Doug?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And I have helped a lot of couples restore that. I have some really beautiful stories of how people have taken the stuff that I teach, which arises from my profession as a peacemaker, and have completely restored their relationships where they thought there was no hope. It's amazing.
Wow.
And it's not difficult to learn these skills either.
Wow. Well, I was watching one video that you had, and it was on the theme of, how to de-escalate, how to calm another human being, an angry person, in 90 seconds or less. Now, when I read the title of that, now I've got 5 grandchildren rather. I can imagine doing that with my little 2-year-old granddaughter if she's upset and I'm just holding her and breathing with her. But how do you do that with an adult that is out of control? And is there a difference between anger versus rage and these different levels of anger?
Okay, so let's start with difference between children and adults. All right.
Yeah.
When adults are angry, as you know, 96% of families are emotionally dysfunctional. They grow emotionally dysfunctional adults. We were all in that situation. I was emotionally dysfunctional. I suspect you were probably emotionally dysfunctional until you started doing a lot of inner work.
Mm-hmm, absolutely.
And most adults are in physical bodies with the emotional competency of a 6-year-old.
Whoa, that's amazing. Say that again, because I want people to get this.
Most, I would say 90, all of a sudden people just wait for the, they're calling me. Sorry.
This is real life.
So most adults, and by that I mean well over 90% of adults in the world are,
Now, is that adults? Let me back up for a moment. Is that adults at a certain age?
I would say, anybody over 18 years old.
Okay.
And
Wow.
I see this over and over again in my work as a peacemaker. But this is not me talking. This is lots of therapists like you, people who've done the research,
Hmm.
are, that we're in adult bodies, but we are in emotionally. We have the emotional competency of a six-year-old because
Hmm.
we get
Hmm.
stuck. There's a really great, how come I can't remember his name? He's in Vancouver, British Columbia, brilliant childhood development psychologist who studied this stuff. And he, Gordon, I'll remember his name. But the point is that when people get angry, really angry, they revert back to where they were emotionally stuck.
Hmm.
And that's why you see a 40-year-old acting like a 6-year-old.
Now that's with uncontrolled anger, right? Because every one of us have anger in our bodies, right? There's
Well,
also things that like flow through the
we
bloodstream
have,
and
we have, okay. So that it's a little more complex than that. But so we can have anger, we can have trait anger, and we can have incidental anger. Trait
Mm,
anger is where we're just kind of we tend to have a low trigger threshold. We tend to be angry at lots of little things. Usually that's PTSD related, usually childhood abuse. And this is the other thing that's really scary, is that most parents deeply abuse their children emotionally and they don't even know it.
mm-hmm.
Let me talk about that just for a second, and we'll cycle back
Do,
to anger and the anger emotions. So
do.
do you remember when you were a little girl and you were maybe 2 or 3 years old and you're running around outside and you fell over and scraped your knee with a little blood and you started to cry? Remember that?
Honestly, no, I don't, but I'm sure it did happen.
Well, most people will remember that
Uh-huh.
because something profound happened. When you start to cry, what do the adults around you start telling you to do?
I'm going to tell you, as a little girl, I know little boys are raised differently, but little girls, oh, honey, let me comfort you. So that's what I would remember, I think, in my subconscious. I'd
Right.
have to ask my mom.
And let me comfort you, or
Ah,
stop
ooh,
crying, or it's
ah,
not that big a deal, or it doesn't
ooh,
hurt, or the pain's going to go away, or be a big girl. Totally abusive. That is
wow.
emotionally invalidating. For little boys, it's worse. Be a big boy.
Yeah.
Don't cry. Big boys don't cry. Don't be a girly girl. Don't be a sissy. We are taught from the time we are 2 years old all the way through adulthood that emotions are bad.
Now,
That
I'm going to hold this because this is pretty profound what you're saying, Doug.
it is.
Is, do you think that it has changed, like say from the 1950s, where the whole culture is saying children are to be seen, not heard, versus in the here and now, and people have access to how to parent? You don't think it's changed at all?
I know it hasn't because I teach workshops where I have young adults in the workshops and I ask them about their upbringing, and then I ask them, how many times have you done this to your kids? And they all raise their hands and say, I do it every day.
Mm-hmm. And you make it emotionally safe while you're teaching that for them to say that, right? Because so many people like are hearing this message and are probably cringing at it.
Right. And all of a sudden, people feel really guilty and shamed by the fact that they're abusing their children. They don't know any better. This is all new science. It's less than 15 years old.
Wow.
So,
Wow.
so the problem is we have this emotional invalidation going on where we're telling children not to have feelings. And the reason we do it is, one, we don't know any better. Two, it's what we were taught by our parents. And three, and most importantly, we're soothing our own anxiety.
That makes a lot of sense. And I tell you, because kids, they don't have the emotional regulation. Some of them come out and they're very like, and you say, stop crying. You don't have anything to cry about, right? They'll say that. And that is abusive. You're saying it is abusive.
That's abusive because, and I'll explain why, but basically we're doing it because the child's unregulated emotions are making us feel anxious.
Mm-hmm.
And the one thing a human being cannot stand is anxiety. So we will do anything to get rid of the anxiety. And so there's a perverse kind of unconscious logic that says, if I tell you to stop feeling an emotion, then I'll feel better myself because I won't experience anxiety. And so if we're untrained and we're not emotionally competent, we are going to tell a child not to feel an emotion in order for us to feel better.
Now, you're claiming in your book that you can do that in 90 seconds to an angry person that's an adult. How is that done?
Well, okay. So here's
I mean,
how
you probably want to get me some backstory, so I want to get to the good stuff here.
I want to lay the foundation to understand that why this is so powerful and so profound. Working with children or working in a relationship or working in a prison, it doesn't matter. Everybody has experienced emotional invalidation. Nobody experiences emotional safety.
Wow, so how? All right, Doug. Here's what I want to ask you this question.
I got the antidote. We'll get there.
I know, but you know what you said, and like this is kind of like a gut punch. I'm a mother of 4 kids. They're now grown, and I've got 5 grandkids. And like, this is a gut punch. How do you keep? And so yeah, I'll let you go on, but it really is.
This is radical thinking. It's based on new science, but now we understand that very, very few families provide emotional safety to their children.
And they claim that they do.
Emotional. Pardon me?
They claim that they do, right?
They claim they do. They claim to have I'm a loving parent. And they are for many reasons. But emotionally, they create unsafety. Have you ever seen a child withdraw, or a teenager, a withdrawn defensive teenager? Or have you ever seen adults who are emotionally unavailable or emotionally defensive?
Of course, all the time.
All the time. Why is that? They are emotionally they have never lived in an emotionally safe environment. The only safety they know is to put walls around them to protect them from the emotional harm and injury that they suffer at the hands of people they love or the people that love them. So that the only coping mechanism they have is to withdraw or become defensive or to get angry, to lash out.
Yeah.
And that's the evidence that supports the idea that first, families are emotionally dysfunctional, and second, they're emotionally unsafe. And it starts with this emotional invalidation that goes on. Have you heard of the Kaiser Permanente ACEs study out of California?
I might have, but you might have to just ground listeners.
Adverse childhood experiences study out of San Diego. It's a long-term longitudinal study of Kaiser Permanente patients in San Diego County, which is middle class and upper middle class for the most part. They've got their poverty too, but what they found is that if a child has 3 or more adverse childhood experiences, which I'll define in a moment, then they are 10 times more likely to smoke, be drug addicted, have depression, and die at an early age of cancer, chronic obstructive pulmonary disease, cancer, diabetes, obesity, and all this stuff. What are the adverse childhood experiences? There are 9 of them, of which of the 9, there are 2 that are physical, obviously physical abuse and sexual abuse. The rest are all emotional.
And we'll have some show notes and some links so people can look this up as well.
Google ACEs study. That's all. It's all over the place. It's really James Perliti and it was the lead researcher on it. And it's phenomenal. If you want to scare yourself about upbringing.
Well, that is scary. Also, and how can we keep from piling guilt upon parents? Because
okay, so here's the antidote.
Okay.
The antidote is to validate emotions instead of invalidate emotions. And
I will say amen to that, Doug. I will say amen to that, because there are reasons that these are triggered. There are reasons they're there. Emotions are valuable. Even in counseling, I'm telling you some of my secrets anyway, that we will actually give a name to the emotion. It's like, I see emotions as temporary messengers to your soul. Like, they're not there for no reason. They're there for a reason. Listen to them, honor them. Take your deep breath, right? Of air. But there's more to your story. I'm sorry.
Take a deep breath. All right. I want to explain how to do it, but also I want to say that as a peacemaker and a mediator, I get called into really deep, intractable conflicts where emotions are so strong that people would rather shoot each other than sit at the table and talk. Wow. I had to come up with a way for people to calm down and be able to talk through their problems. And nothing that I learned as a lawyer and nothing that I learned in my very advanced master's degree program prepared me for dealing with strong emotions, because the knowledge wasn't out there.
Wow.
I became a student of neuroscience and studied under John Wallman at Caltech University. And ultimately, I stumbled on this idea of affect labeling. And then in 2007, Matthew Lieberman, a neuroscientist at UCLA, did the brain scanning studies that showed why affect labeling works. So now we have brain science to support this. And then the work of Lisa Feldman Barrett, who's a neuroscientist out of Northeastern University, with her constructed theory of emotions, gives us the theoretical foundation for why this idea that I'm about to talk about really works. This is hard science. This is not the old Gordian active listening crap from the 1950s and 60s, or Marshall Rosenberg's nonviolent communication. None of that stuff works. It never has worked. Using I statements doesn't work. It never has worked. And yet it's still taught today, which I've got a niece who's finishing up her PsyD at Fuller, and she's been taught to use I statements when reflecting. And I just shake my head and said, your professors are back in the dark ages.
Wow, Doug, I'm noticing even across the screen, because I do this all the time when I'm seeing counselors, there is a tremendous amount of passion that you have. There is no question you believe and are in your zone in talking about this. Because
it's because I've mediated thousands and thousands of conflicts. I've taught over 10,000 life inmates how to stop violence, and they have stopped violence. And I have reports from thousands and thousands of students around the world that I've taught over the years, these techniques that report back how it's absolutely transformed their lives. And it's all based on science. So here's how you do it. It's easy to describe.
I'm waiting for this. I'm waiting for this drum roll.
It's easy.
Come on, drum roll. Let's listen. I can't wait to hear that.
But not so easy to implement. And I'll explain why.
All right.
Step number one. Whenever you're confronted with somebody who's angry, I don't care whether you have a 2-year-old who's in a tantrum or a 40-year-old who's having a tantrum.
That kind of looks the same so many times, doesn't it?
The first thing you do is you ignore the words. You've got to go against your programming about listening to people, and you just can't listen to them. Their words have no meaning.
Now, how do you do that? How do you not listen to the words?
Practice. You force yourself to not hear the words. It just becomes white noise.
Okay.
And this is a little hard because we've been conditioned that words are the most important part of communication. But as we know from Mizrabian study back in the 1960s, 94% of all human communication is nonverbal. Only 6% is verbal. We can ignore the words. There's no information there that we need to pay attention to. We've heard those angry words before.
Well, let me hold something. Let me hold something. You're about to share this technique. And do you see this? Like I call it the reptilian brain. A lot of people call it the reptilian brain. They're showing up like a reptile, fight, freeze.
We got to stop that. I got to stop you.
Oh my gosh, you're kidding me.
I'm going to tell you right now, anybody who uses that terminology around me, I immediately discount as they don't know what they're talking about.
Oh my gosh. Okay.
So the idea of the reptilian brain, the paleo-mammalian brain, and the neo-mammalian brain, everybody talks about the reptilian, but they don't talk about the two other brains. That came from a researcher at the National Institutes of Health, a guy by the name of Paul MacLean.
Okay.
He's dead now. He formulated this idea of 3 different brains back in the 1950s as a way of trying to describe how evolution created and moved through the phylogeny and the ontogeny of human brain development. It turns out there is no science to support his ideas. So when you talk about the reptilian brain, there is no such thing as the reptilian brain. There's no such thing as the paleo-mammalian brain. There's no such thing as the neo-mammalian brain. Yes, different brain parts evolved over many, many millennia. And the human brain is quite new, well, relatively new, about 200,000 years old. 200, about that. Maybe a little older than that. But this whole idea of the reptilian brain, that's all crap.
Oh, Doug.
And so anybody.
All right, you're going to have to bust through some things here. All right, you're going to have to bust through some things.
I'm sorry, but the science just isn't there.
Oh goodness. All right.
Well, so let's get back to we got angry words. Somebody's really fighting anger. We're going to ignore those words.
And they're not in a. Do you consider they're in a fight, freeze mode?
I don't care where they are because they could be in grief. I mean, it doesn't matter what the emotion is.
Okay.
They could be happy. You can do this by happiness too. It works. No, it doesn't matter what the emotion is. Okay, let me describe the technique, and then I will
try not to interrupt.
But remember, Judy, we are not born with emotions. Humans are not born with emotions. That's really important to understand. We are born.
Whoa, wait! I gotta wrap my head around this one. I gotta wrap my head around this one. I have 4 kids.
We are not born with emotions.
Babies are emotions.
Okay. Babies have affect. They do not have emotions. Dogs have affect. Dogs do not have emotions.
All right, let's do a simple definition.
Okay.
Between an affect and emotions.
So affect is the biophysiological reaction in the brain with different neuron circuits, depending upon what the affect is, to create pain or pleasure, basically. Depending upon which theorists you follow, and I happen to use the model developed by psychologist Sylvan Tompkins, there are 1, 2, 3, or 9 affects. I use the 9 affect model that Tompkins developed in the 1960s.
So what is the difference then between an affect and
an
emotion?
All right, so affect is either positive, negative, or neutral. So it's got 3 valences. An affect has intensities of arousal, weak, moderate, or intense. You've got 9 affects. So for example, anger, rage is an affect. Fear is an affect. Disgust is an affect. Shame, humiliation is an affect. So you can experience all of these different affects in different intensities and different valences, all at the same time. So every emotion is a complex. Think of an artist's palette where we've got primary colors. Those are our affect. Emotions are what happens when all these different colors, emotional colors, are mixed together in the moment.
Well, I got to back up. Did Disney have it right when they did the?
No.
Okay. What was the name of that?
Inside Out, I think it was called.
What is it?
Inside Out.
Yeah, Inside Out. You're saying Disney got it wrong?
Totally. It's a great metaphor, but it's totally wrong.
Okay. Totally wrong. Wow, Doug, I had no idea this conversation would be such
how we think we are is not how we really are, quite frankly. So we got the affect.
All right.
So what we have to learn, starting at about when we start to verbalize at about 18 months, as little toddlers, we have to learn how to take that affect and construct abstract concepts of all these thousands of different combinations of affect into what we call a cognitive or emotional database. And the degree to which we can categorize affect is a large degree determines how emotionally competent we become as adults. So this is where we get into the problem with emotional invalidation. If we're told not to experience an emotion, we never have the opportunity to take the affective experience we're having, say anger, rage, mixed in with shame, humiliation, mixed in with disgust, mixed in with fear, and find and build a working vocabulary that describes that affective experience.
Okay, so let me back up a little bit. Let's see if I'm summarizing you correctly and following you correctly, because you're saying there's a difference between affect and emotions, and that we are born with babies are not born with emotions, but they are born with affect. And you are under the camp of that there are 9 constructs of affect.
Correct.
And part of that is pleasure or pain, and then there's 7 others besides that. Is that what you're saying?
Well, they divide into pleasure and pain. We only have 2 positive affects, 1 neutral affect, and 6 negative affect.
Okay, and you're saying that those are not emotions. Babies are born with this. We're innately born with this, and then by the time we're what you said 3 or 2 or something,
we start developing our emotional database at about 18 months. It's developing before that, but the emotional centers of the brain don't really mature until about 18 months.
Okay, so the emotional centers of the brain then developing at about 18 months.
At the same time, we start to verbalize, start to talk at around 18 months.
Okay.
And then now we are able to start constructing concepts of emotion that relate to various affective experiences we're having.
So all emotions are going to be linked back to one of these 9 affects, you're saying.
Correct.
And
now
so when babies come out and they're crying and they feel hunger, that's not an emotion. That's they feel the pain. It's one of the affects, right?
Yeah, it could be distress, it could be anger, it could be fear, but that's the pain. It's probably distress, which is an affect.
Mm-hmm. So let me write this down. Okay, so we can have them in the notes, show notes. So name what those 9 are, but you said that there's other theories about what they are, but let's
see if I can remember them all off the top of my head. So we have happiness, and we have happiness, joy, and we have
is happiness, joy the same thing?
Yeah, it's the same kind of
the
affective experience of pleasure.
But these are the things that the Inside Out movie did address. Like these are the affects.
I don't
Well,
want to. I don't
that
want to
might
get into
be
a critique of the movie. It's
that might be another conversation. I'm
that's
still wanting to know how you handle 90 seconds, how
we're
to
gonna
handle
we're gonna
somebody
get
that.
there. But you can see there's a foundational knowledge that is very different than what we think we know about.
Well, I tell you what, I'm learning a lot here. Okay, so we've got distress, we've got anger, we've got fear, we got happiness, joy. We
Okay,
have
so
what else?
let's just work. Positives are happiness, joy, and excitement. Those are our two positives. Neutral is surprise, startle.
Okay.
Then I see if I can remember all six. We've got fear, terror, anger, rage, distress.
Fear, terror is the same category, right? Okay.
Fear and terror, right? It's
All
sort of
right.
right. We have fear, terror. We have distress. We
But
have
you said anger, rage too is an
anger, rage is an affect.
Okay.
Hardwired into us. These are all hardwired. In each of these affects, we can see different parts of the brain that are associated with these different affects.
Okay.
So we've got, I said, distress, disgust.
Anger, rage, fear. Okay, so distress, anger, rage, fear, terror, and then there's happiness, joy, excitement are the two positives, and then you said there's a surprise, startle is one.
You're confusing me. Here, let's go through the negatives. So I don't forget them.
I want to be a good student, Doug. I want to be a good student.
Anger, rage, fear, terror, distress, shame, humiliation, disgust, and dismell. Dismell is the experience of smelling spoiled milk, for example. These are all affective experiences that have been established to be associated with certain brain circuits and anatomical parts of the brain. And we're born with all that. We're born with this stuff. It's hardwired into us.
So by the time we're 18 months old, and
we're now beginning to associate the physical feelings or the feelings we have within us, the physical experiences of all these affective experiences, and putting them into words, into an emotional database.
Okay. And so I think what I'm hearing too, I want to really get this, that the difference between the affects and the emotions is perhaps that child's awareness or how it affects the body, like these affects, these constructs that are affects that you're born with are like now associating or with physical body reactions, and then you're putting this in this database, and by a time a child's trying to learn how to walk or talk,
right,
that they're trying to, and that's where you're saying they get invalidated. Okay, gotcha.
So that process is never completed, which creates the stuckedness at, say, 6 years old, where people never mature beyond 6 years old emotionally.
Right, because what we're dealing with is we're dealing with trauma, not being heard, understood, which is a very, it's a very human primal need for all of us, is to be heard and understood. Right.
Exactly correct.
And so we're not getting those needs met by the time we're like 6 years old. Then you're saying because we haven't, that most people get stuck. And then that's why as adults, no matter what age they are what you call, what some have called is arrested development. Is that kind of what you're saying? Okay, good. I wanted to get all this in some language here that I wanted my listeners to hear.
That's correct. Okay, so let's continue on. So the reason that this becomes important is to understand why emotions are so important. Emotions allow us to concretize affective experience into consciousness, so we can become aware that we're having an affective experience. Emotions allow us to do that. If we just had the affective experience, all we would do is be feeling the anger, feeling the distress, but we wouldn't be able to describe it. So it concretizes it into consciousness. It allows us to draw inferences about cause and effect, which has caused me to be so pissed off. And it allows us, most importantly, to communicate our experience to another human.
And which, okay,
that's why emotions are so critical.
That's why this whole human journey of coming packaged with emotions and those developing is, those emotions serve a purpose.
Absolutely.
Of knowing what we want or what we don't want. And so when those are,
makes it pay attention to our environment.
Right. And so most people, you're saying, are not getting these needs met. And then they're raising their children. And now we are talking about, Doug, I really want to bring up this concept of neurogenesis, because the things that we're dealing with in the here and now, neuroscience wise, you're probably familiar with that term, I'd imagine.
Mm-hmm.
It's like, it's not just in the here and now, but it's been passed down from generation to generation.
That's right.
So what we're dealing with as far as a person's anger ability to like regulate or not is not just them. It's like we're breaking through a lot of things, aren't we?
Absolutely. I mean, if you, I can't tell you how many incarcerated people I worked with, when they described their family backgrounds, they said that we only had one emotion in our family, and it was anger and rage. That's all they ever learned. And it's been going on for generations.
Which actually, that's what they believe.
Well,
but
sure.
that's right. But that's not like,
that's been their experience.
So in other words, yeah, that's their experience. And so they're not even a whole human being moving along in this world, why it lands them in jail or prison or whatever.
Maximum security prison.
Yeah.
Okay, so here's the thing. Have you heard the term alexithymia before?
I probably have not. I'm learning a whole lot.
Okay, so alexithymia.
So explain what it is, whether I've heard about it or not.
Alexithymia is a subclinical condition that is associated with many, many different brain disorders, but it's essentially the inability to be able to identify your own emotional experience and talk about it. Okay? Many, many people are alexithymia. And here's why would a lawyer learn all this?
I'm really curious. Why would an attorney learn all of this?
Understand my job as a peacemaker and a mediator is I get paid a lot of money to walk into really intense conflicts. And I have to have tools. I have to be immediately diagnose what's going on. And I have to have tools to help people calm down instantly so that I can help them work through the conflict. All right. So understanding what's going on in those human brains becomes absolutely essential to my work. And if I didn't have this knowledge, I would not be effective. And I know many of my colleagues don't have these skills, and they aren't nearly as effective as I am.
Are you teaching other attorneys how to do this?
Oh yeah, I teach graduate classes at Pepperdine University, and for tomorrow I got an all-day workshop with people in the Midwest where we're going to do some advanced de-escalation training. So I teach. So okay, so here, have you ever heard the expression "I'm so angry I could put my fist through a wall"?
Oh, absolutely. Not only have I heard that.
That's the effect of alexithymia. In other words, people are so angry they can't express their anger, they can't self-regulate because they have no emotional database. So all they can do is act out to get rid of the interoceptive feelings they're having, the affective experience they have. They have to take some physical action like punching their fist through a wall. All domestic violence comes down to alexithymia.
Let me ask you this, because I've heard a lot of things in my counseling office. Is alexithymia also associated, say, with self-harm, cutting?
Yes.
Okay.
Okay. So as I teach my peacemaking students, our goal is to reduce alexithymia. And the way we do that is through this process that I've just started describing called affect labeling. And affect labeling means I'm going to label and reflect back your emotional experience. So I'm going to ignore your angry words because they don't mean anything right now. The only thing that's really important is your emotional experience. So the second step is I'm going to read your emotional data field. We're hardwired for doing this. But because our culture, our Western culture, has given privilege to this concept of rationality, which, by the way, doesn't exist, we have a privilege of rationality over emotions. So emotions are bad, they're weak, they're irrational, right?
Which is so not true.
We've never really been able to tap into this innate ability that we have to read other people's emotions.
So back up. Number one is that you label the affect that they're in.
Ignore the words. Number one.
Okay. Number one is ignore the words.
Number two, read the emotions.
Okay.
Which we can do automatically and effortlessly and accurately. And it's by evolution has put this process into us. Now, I'll just speak very quickly to that because some people say, what do you mean read the emotions? How can I do that? Human beings developed the capacity to talk, vocabulary, 230,000 years ago. Our hominids have been on the planet for millions of years. How did we communicate before we had vocabulary, before the hypoglossal muscles and nerves developed sufficiently and the brain case expanded enough with the advent of the mastery of fire, by the way, which allowed higher calorie intake, massive calorie intake. that allowed the brain to expand and all the nerves and muscles that control our voices to grow and develop. We did it because we could read each other's affect. We could read emotions. And we were we were all hardwired into being able to non-verbally read what other people are actually experiencing.
That has to do with mirror neurons in the brain, correct?
A little bit. There's a lot of controversy around mirror neurons. I used to think,
goodness, everything I'm bringing to you, you're really shooting down. I'm going to have to go back and
yeah, there's a lot of controversy. There's a lot of controversy about that. I used to really hype on mirror neurons a lot, but like everything else, it was an oversimplified, somewhat exaggerated description of what's really going on.
Okay, yeah.
Okay, so number 2, we're going to read the emotional data fields. The way we do this, it's really simple. Just shut up. If you have to take a little bit of a breath, you don't need to take a deep breath. Take a little bit of breath and just quiet your mind. And just be present with this angry person who's spewing all these angry words at you that you're ignoring. And within a second or two, the emotions that this person is experiencing will flow into your consciousness. It happens automatically. You don't have to do anything. And it's almost always 100% accurate. It's always accurate. All right, number 3, and this is the hard part. You reflect back the emotions that come into your consciousness to the speaker, to the angry person, using a simple you statement. You are angry. You're frustrated. You're enraged.
So hold on a minute. Back up a little bit. I've got to challenge this, Doug.
Go ahead.
You statements.
Not the first.
In order to do number 3 effectively, number 2 and number 1, you're going to have to do a whole lot of like grounding. No. Because
I can teach, you can master this in less than 6 weeks. Practicing it 3 times a week. Our brains are hardwired for this. You're simply,
and it depends on the other person's readiness.
Nope.
Okay, so
Nope.
But all right, so if another person, okay, we can't talk about the reptilian part anymore, but he's still he or she, let's just say he's a he, and he's keyed up in the moment.
Right.
And he's
hey Joe, you are really pissed off. You're really frustrated, you're angry. You feel completely disrespected. Nobody's hearing you. You feel completely unappreciated. You don't feel supported.
And that's what you do to that angry person.
Joe.
Okay, so there's an energy about you, Doug. There's an energy about you that makes that effective.
Every human being I've ever taught can do this. I've never had anybody not do it. I've had murderers, serial murderers in prison do this and stop prison riots. But
you're saying it in such a way, like if you say, you have to say it with confidence.
I'm a little more advanced because I control tonality, volume, pacing to match the intensity of Joe, who's angry and outraged. So
so that's what you're getting at, is for the person who is, it's basically a confrontation, basically, right?
No, it's not.
But your match, you have to match that. So you don't want, all right, so the person who's ignoring the words.
If you are the person who's calming down the angry person, this is a little more advanced. If you're the person calming down the angry words, one of the things you want to do is if they're here, you want to come underneath them a little bit with your tonality, volume, and pacing of your voice.
And it has to be controlled.
Well, yeah, but it's easy to do. Women can do it just as well as men can.
Okay. A woman who's normally like hides all the time, she can learn how to do this within 6 months.
Absolutely. But you're not going to start off by going into the deep end. I'll talk about how to practice it in just a second.
Okay. All right.
But the last part of this is the hardest part for most people. And that is to reflect back the emotions with a you statement. So I'll say, Judy, you're really upset. You're frustrated. You don't feel heard. You don't feel appreciated. You feel completely disrespected. You feel like you've been completely abandoned. And you feel really sad because you don't feel loved and you don't feel worthy.
And so you're going back to, you feel based upon the affect.
Emotions. I'm using emotions.
Yeah, I mean, I guess what I'm saying is if a person, I almost can't conceptualize this. I need to get your book and read it and figure it out. But I'm listening to you and I have a whole lot of skepticism. I got to tell you, Doug,
Of course.
I do. So
Because it flies in the face of everything you learned.
It does go, but also everything I've practiced too.
That's right.
In personal life.
I hate to tell this to you, but you've been trained. You have not been trained correctly. Let me restate this. You were trained with what the knowledge was at the time that you went through your training. The knowledge has completely changed, and it repudiates everything. It repudiates 100 years of counseling and therapy. It repudiates it absolutely.
Okay.
When you learned how to use I statements, all that Thomas Gordon stuff. Do you know why why people use I statements when they're talking to angry people?
You know what? I ask people not even to engage when a person is like so keyed up. That's
so think about this. So you want to engage them. Remember, they're alexithemic. When they're angry and upset, they're alexithemic. They do not have access to their emotional database. If you try to engage them by asking them questions, it's only going to piss them off because they're going to get more and more frustrated because they can't access what they're feeling.
Right.
You've experienced that, right?
Absolutely, I have.
That's
Absolutely.
right. Well, that's why they are alexithemic in the moment. So why do we have to label the emotions? Because what I'm literally doing is lending my prefrontal cortex to you for the 90 seconds it takes for your ventral medial prefrontal cortex to come back online, and for the emotional centers of your brain, primarily your amygdala, to calm down, to become inhibited. And that's exactly what the brain scanning study shows happens.
Interesting.
Nothing else that's out there has ever been proven by scanning studies to work. This has. Now, here's the thing for parents, since we're talking to parents perhaps and couples, and what the studies show is that when you affect label your children, starting at about 2 years old, you can actually start earlier than that. Parents who have learned how to affect label their children show that when those kids reach 8 or 9 years of age, they're 3 to 4 grade levels ahead of their peers academically. They're socially more liked, they're socially, emotionally more mature, and they take on, they are way more adjusted than kids who come from what we would call a normal family.
Yeah.
I mean, it's a powerful, profound influence on the children's brains when you affect their brains.
Wow, that's valuable, very valuable.
Now, the other incentive here is that if you're in a relationship with somebody and both of you learn how to do this, you will never have a fight or argument again. They just don't exist.
Well, let's address one thing here. Because what about those who are in relationship with a person, say, who is schizophrenic or in a psychotic state?
Much more difficult. The only personality type or personality disorder where I really don't think this is effective is with a overt maladaptive narcissist.
Okay, an overt maladaptive narcissist, which people are claiming that they're married to that, right? But what would be the percentage of folks that are dealing with this kind of relationship?
We tend to way over label people.
I know, and it doesn't help.
I don't tend to do that. I try not to do that.
Yeah.
But I've worked with, in my work as a mediator and peacemaker, I've worked with both in my prison work and outside in conflicts that I get called into. I've seen all the major personality disorders, and the only one that I can't work with is the overt maladaptive narcissist.
Wow. And I would say your experience in the prisons, that you're going to have all flavors of all kinds of things that are showing up. So that's fascinating.
The diversity of cognitive capacity from low to high, of innate intelligence from low to high, of education from low to high, of ethnic and diversity. I mean, it's unbelievable. And the mental illness you see, but here's the thing. It works. This works. It works. I have taken men who are gangbangers, violent gangbangers, and turned them into powerful peacemakers and mediators.
That is amazing. Doug, you are doing a remarkable work. I've learned so much.
And it's all based on this single idea of listening to and reflecting back somebody else's emotions. I have reports from parents who say they started affect labeling their 2-year-old who was having severe tantrums. Within 4 months, the tantrums were gone.
That is
Forever.
amazing.
I'll tell you another story. It happened earlier this year. I got an email from a guy in May, and he wrote to me and he said, "Dear Doug, you've never heard of me, but I've got your book and I've taken your online courses, and you were referred to me by my wife, who works with your wife, and I just wanted to tell you the story. He said, I've got Asperger's. I'm a serial entrepreneur. I made a lot of money, but I have a tendency to tell everybody what to do, and I don't listen to anybody. And my wife of 25 years finally had enough of me and said, time for time out. We're going to separate." So the other day, we were in our separate homes, but we were watching our daughter perform in a play virtually over Zoom. And I texted her and I just labeled her emotions, because she seemed really happy and proud. I said, "You're really happy and proud of our daughter." And she wrote back and she said, "There's hope for our marriage yet." And he said, "Thank you very much."
Oh.
6 weeks later, I never hear from the guy again. I don't even know who this guy is. I get an email from him. He said, "Dear Doug, I'm in Maui with my wife celebrating her birthday and 25 years of marriage. Thank you very much."
Oh,
And
wow. What a
because
remarkable.
he had the strength and courage to learn these skills, and she did too. And they started using these skills with each other.
And you've got a product online where people can go. I do want to know how can people get access to your teaching?
So I created a website. I'm going to give you a simple bit.ly link. It's dougnoll.co/Judy Herman.
Oh, thank you very much.
You're welcome.
All right.
I created a
We'll have
webpage.
that.
That's for everybody who's listening. And on that page, you can get a free ebook that describes everything I'm talking about. You can buy my book, De-Escalate. You can get a fairly less than $200 course on the De-Escalate course, a video course. And then if you want to do the emotional work, I give you a 50% discount off a fairly expensive Develop Emotional Competency course, 2 courses that will completely change your life, just as it is for tens of thousands of other people.
Wow, Doug, this is amazing. This is amazing. And thank you for your generosity for sure. This has been quite interesting. I'm learning a lot, and I'm really drawn now to really delving in to what you're sharing and changing a lot of my language in counseling.
It is. And I mean, it's sad to say that there just are not many people in your business who follow the neuroscience like I have. I mean, most of this stuff, what I do is I take the neuroscience and I read a lot of it. Right now I'm studying neuroeconomics, the neuroscience of decision making. And when I talk to these guys, these men and women who are doing this amazing work, they have no clue what the practical applications of their work are. They're just interested in, what the electrical potential is and the potassium and sodium levels in the, in the axon of the neuron, and how all this stuff that's going on at the very micro level in the brain. And what I try to do is take that information and walk it back to saying, what is the implication of this in terms of society, in terms of culture, in terms of how we learn and teach, and in terms of human behavior and how we react to each other. And what I've learned from all my study is that we've been lied to for 4,000 years.
Wow.
By philosophers and theologians who, for their own purposes, have just not told us the truth about who our essential human nature. And our essential human nature is this: we are 98% emotional and only 2% rational. We are not rational beings. And we cannot even be rational unless we're emotional first.
That's fascinating. That's fascinating. Yeah. And we walk in the light with which we have, don't we? And I have done, and I've got mentors in neuroscience. Dan Siegel is one of them. And there's several books I've read, but not have delved as deeply, Doug, obviously, as you have. So I'm really eager to learn more. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
This has been a delight. All right, so we will sign off, and we'll put the link in the show notes, and you'll have that. And thank you so much for being my guest. You have given so much value.
Well, if I don't provoke and get you crazed, then I'm not doing my job.
You stirred me up for sure.
There you go.
Thanks again.
You're welcome.
I'd like to thank Doug Noll for sharing his wisdom with us. I must admit, it was challenging for me to hear that almost all of us have been emotionally abused, but he gives us hope. Here's 3 things to remember. Number 1, studies have shown that when parents help their children verbalize their emotions, they become emotionally intelligent and are more well-adjusted than those from normal families. Number 2, when spouses learn how to do this with each other, they'll never have a fight again. And number 3, the only individual in which this method doesn't work is with the overt maladaptive narcissist. Okay, keyword here is, especially if you have narcissism in your relationship, we're talking, the keywords are overt and maladaptive. Okay, so I appreciate also Doug's special link so that you can get more resources and learn these powerful methods. And that is dougnoll.co/Judy Herman. What stood out to you? Share your takeaways by going to betterrelationshipsbetterlife.com. Our next episode is entitled No Blame, No Shame, in which Imago therapist Rabbi Shlomo Slatkin tells us how he and his wife created the Marriage Restoration Project. Stay tuned as he addresses resistance and the need for safety and connection. Until then, feel free to share, subscribe, rate, and comment in the streaming platform of your choice. See you next time.